right, so welcome everyone to our first NLU Analyst Hour webinar series. This is the Daylight Feature Overview for Analysts episode. I'm Kim Larson. I'm a Client Success Manager here at Luminoso, and we are joined by John. John, you want to introduce yourself?
Hi everyone, also a Client Success Manager here at Luminoso and looking to tag team this webinar with Kim.
Awesome. So let's start with what we're going to be covering today. So we will be covering 4 primary pieces that start with Daylight. We have what's in my data, the 2 primary features that go with that, the so what, the business questions, sentiment and driver pairing, how to deep dive, and then what features we have to collaborate. So that's where we'll be starting today. The data set examples that we'll be using in our references are going to include the beer review data. There's 50,000 beer reviews. If any of you need access to this project, we're happy to give it to you. We also have pharmaceutical reviews. WebMD allows their user base to review any of the pharmaceutical drugs that they are prescribed, and people can write reviews on it, similar to Amazon reviews that we see on Amazon or Walmart, Target, etc. We're also going to include some screenshots from No Man's Sky. It is a review thing from Steam, so if you want to learn more about that, we have a whole episode webinar series that touches on No Man's Sky stories specifically, and we'll also be including some references to our own reviews that John and I have received from the Luminoso side. So John, any other notes on the data sets that we're covering, or we can jump right into the engine stuff?
No, I think we picked a good selection that kind of shows the range of the tool, so I'm happy to show you guys that today.
Cool. All right, so starting with the science, for folks who are unfamiliar or haven't used our engine before, Daylight is a tool that surfaces what's in the data, and it uses a vector model underneath the hood to cluster concepts, which surfaces themes, relationships, and a lot more. So this is the review data that we get from our clients when they submit the client feedback survey, and the outcome from that is 2 natural clusters. We have our service cluster, the relationship with Luminoso cluster, and we have our product cluster, where we can see themes related to sentiment and then Galaxy, Excel, drivers, etc. The concepts that are surfaced are the most prevalent concepts. We touch on that in a little bit. And the clustering is created from the association between concepts. So terms that are used frequently in conjunction with each other, like we see helpful and Daylight or Kim and CSM, the AI automatically detects what is related to what, and terms that are used synonymously as each other. So if John's clients refer to him as our CSM, and my clients are referring to me as Kim Larson, also the CSM, the AI is able to identify that. John, anything else you want to surface about our science stuff?
No, but my name isn't in there, so I need my clients that are watching this right now to help me get my name in there, because Kim looks like it's associated with helpful, and I need to get there as well.
And the baseline science with the word freak underneath the hood, I think John is also a more common name than Kim Larson as a collocation. A collocation is a term that's used, a series of words that are used in a series more often than we would see out in natural language. So we have use the tool is a collocation that is unique to this domain. Upload data is unique to this domain, and that surfaces in here. So if you wanted to surface John's name more prevalently, include first and last name, a little bit of a hack there. All right, so let's start with what we can do to see, well, what's in my data, because this is what Galaxy looks like from ours. The first thing that you do when you upload a project is you'll see the highlights page, and this is what's in my data. So the highlights page is used to kind of take a pulse of, well, did it read my data? In this example, we have the beer reviews. We're not seeing mentions of No Man's Sky, of Luminoso, of vitamin gummies. It's showing us that it read our data, and it shows us what's unique to our data set. On the left, we have volume and Galaxy tiles. The functionality here the blue bars show the 15 most prevalent concepts sorted by frequency. The dark blue portion represents the exact matches, and the light blue portion represents the conceptual matches. These are related to each other, so we can see aftertaste is mentioned explicitly a few times, but it's related to other terms that are coming through as conceptual matches, which takes up the remainder of the volume here. There's some words that don't have a lot of conceptual matches because there's not something that's being used consistently synonymously as, for example, the word pores. There's not a lot of words to use instead of pores. So I think that's the word you use. And then galaxy, we have the 7 most prevalent and distinct clusters and 4 concepts that are most representative of those clusters. So we see nose, hint, bitterness existing kind of here in the face. These words are used together in the reviews, whereas amber, orange, finger referring to the home and the color, that all clusters together and the AI surfaces that here. But we get a better view of that actually in the feature where we get to see the galaxy stuff.
Yeah, so volume being very much more quantitative focus, and Galaxy really showing you trying to extract the relationships in the concepts rather than being very numerically focused.
Yeah, the folks who are used to coding by hand or people who are transitioning from an Excel-oriented workflow often feel most comfortable in volume first. And the folks who are most intimately related or understanding of the science, the folks who are most similar there, they're going to gravitate more towards Galaxy. So it's neither one's necessarily better or worse than the other. They just have different functions, and depending on what you're most comfortable with, that's probably where you're going to start. All right, so after the what's in my data on the highlights page, we have the so what. So this is where a lot of our business users will gravitate if they're studying NPS surveys or CSAT scores on product reviews, etc. They're going to gravitate towards these functions. So drivers is the, if they mentioned concept X, what was the average numerical value? For beer, if they mentioned watery, on average, their overall satisfaction with that beer is going to be lower than if they didn't mention watery. If they mentioned words like delicious or perfect, as humans, we would say obviously, but there's numerical data to back that up where we can see the scores on average higher than the average number of, the average score there. And we like to pair that with sentiment, which for some folks can sound redundant to when they're using drivers. But sentiment has a unique approach in that it takes the word or the concept, it reads the whole verbatim, and it can identify whether that reference to the thing was positive, neutral, or negative. Was balance described positively? Was balance described as a statement of fact? Or is it described negatively? And it will break those out because it may depend on what your data set is, whether these things are good or bad. Cloudy could go either way. It could be neutral. Oily, depending on your data set. If Valvoline or skincare, oily is going to mean different things for different data sets, and sentiment can pair it. Sometimes these drivers and sentiment are fairly aligned, where a bad thing is a bad thing and a good thing is a good thing in both spaces. But we want to make sure that we're pairing it strategically to tell if something's a light annoyance, like a long receipt, where it may be a negative sentiment, but not a negative driver necessarily, or if it's a actual problem in an otherwise good experience. There's a lot of ways to look at it. So. Anything else?
Yeah, drivers kind of, some people can give you 5-star rating and still give you negative reviews. So really important to allow users to not miss anything. A lot of times, you can overlook a 5-star review just because it gave you that really good score, but sentiment allows you to really get into the details and vice versa.
Yeah, and we'll see that with our customer data too. If they really like us overall, sometimes they'll be very candid with their feedback because they want to see us improve. Vice versa, if there's someone who's really frustrated, they may really pad or soften their feedback to be kind because they have a good relationship with John or I. And this allows us to parse, like, how are they actually feeling from the quant side versus what are they saying, and be able to act accordingly. So that's the high level functionality that we see in the highlights page. The next thing we want to go into is concept control and looking at how we control the concepts and how we can break those apart. So let's start with prevalence. So in any feature, if you select the fourth blue tab with the search icon over here, by default, it will display the top concepts by prevalence in order of prevalence. The highlights page picks the top 15 and ranks them by their number of matches. In the beer review data, the term that was mentioned most often compared to how often that term is mentioned in natural language is the word flavor followed by smell. Beer, which many analysts may expect to be the most prevalent term, is a bit lower down the list, but we can learn that from, people are talking about beer maybe more in natural language relative to how much they're talking about flavor. A little bit confusing. John, do you want to try to clarify for me?
No, I think you kind of hit it spot on. I think prevalence is one of the pillars that we base kind of the system on. It's really important to understand how it works. It's really just about the data set. If the data set is speaking in a certain sort of way or a certain sort of tone, Luminoso understands that context and is able to extract, what is the most prevalent concept, because it runs the model so many times, because we do kind of take that interest to detail. So beer being kind of lower down in the top concepts by prevalence can happen just because of the nature of the data set. Maybe when you're giving a beer review, you're not necessarily going to mention beer that much. It's kind of given that you're going in there.
You may refer to it by name, like the IPA or the stout. They're not saying the beer stout or whatever. Cool. So let's say we're interested in the flavors of this. Like, okay, we get that the beer review data is about beer. All of this we can take for granted. That's how an analyst may use Daylight as a functionality. Let's dig into chocolate, because that is the most prevalent flavor in the list. The rest of it is more descriptions of what is in beer. So if we go into chocolate, we can save it. Whenever there's a plus sign or add to concepts, you can add it to your concept list, and we can start to curate it like a tag. So chocolate was mentioned explicitly just over 12,000 times, constituting about 24% of the data set. And then it surfaces the conceptual matches. So those terms that had a high association score with it, which terms were used frequently in conjunction or synonymously as. So caramel, vanilla, toffee, cocoa, those warmer flavors. And there's some folks in our audience who are more flavor and scent oriented, so I'll defer to them on the appropriate relationships there. But we're not seeing words like hibiscus or citrusy. It's a specific flavor profile that's being surfaced as a conceptual match. Now, when we click the edit pencil next to the concept, we have this new pane that was released fairly recently, where you can now see the number of matches and the association score of the conceptual match to the exact term. So using the word drink, we picked this example because drink can go two ways, right? Drink could be the verb of like I drink, I sip, I consumed, I gulped, or it could be the noun side where the drink is the beer, the drink is the booze. It surfaces that, and we can kind of explore that as accordingly. We can check the boxes. So if we decide that we want drink to be defined as the action, we can select those and click include, and those will be added to the exact match list for this concept. And we may rename it as drink action or something and change the color accordingly. John, anything to add on this?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's just a really good feature to, edit your concept. Hopefully this helps make it a lot faster. We've heard a lot about how typing out minuses and commas might not be the fastest way to get there. So yeah, excited for the checkboxes. They're a huge improvement.
Yeah, and I want to caution users, while we are now surfacing the association scores, I want to make sure that folks aren't necessarily misreading that as a specific correlation. It's a boiled down version of the 300 dimension vector term into a single number, where a perfect association, drink is an exact match for drink, that's going to have a relationship of 1. It's very rare to see anything close to 0. I think that's if you mix English and Arabic, those might have a a 0 relationship because they're not in the same language base and they're not used in the same verbatims necessarily. Usually we'll see something closer to the 40 to 80 range. That's a reasonable number there.
Right. Generally, your data sets are around kind of the similar things. So seeing those scores are kind of very hard to put. You'd have to do some crazy maneuvering to get it in there.
Yeah, so I would read it more as a heat map where you look at the relative strength between the terms and not necessarily putting that number in front of folks unless they're aware of the context of what it's coming from. They didn't teach daylight, they didn't teach NLU in undergrad. So we want to make sure that we're contextualizing for our audiences when we're putting this in front of stakeholders. Another thing that I want to surface here is we have the exclude button, and this is a pretty heavy-handed functionality where if I were to exclude beer because I maybe didn't want that to be part of it, that removes every review that mentioned drink and beer as well. It doesn't turn it into a duly noted. It intentionally carves it out of your overall document count. There are some good use cases for it, which is why we have it this way, but just be cognizant of when you do an exclude, keep track of your total matches and make sure that you're still kind of upholding the integrity of your data. So when you add concepts, you can create your concept list. Here in the beer data, we have a fruity flavor group where we put in pear and pineapple and strawberries and define it that way. So when we click down the association list, we click include, and that allows us to create a group that has the flavors below it. Using the renaming concept feature, adding the prefixes allow us to quickly sort alphabetically, keep it really clean, which can make the analysis a bit easier and feel more manageable. If you select multiple concepts, you can change the color really quickly. So if I want all my terrible flavors to be purple, I would select those, click this button down here, and name them that way. So.
Yeah, this style of concept list, I think Kim has kind of tokenized, and it goes really well into reports. So making it easier for your stakeholders to understand what each concept is about, kind of contextualizing the concept itself a little bit, because you always have to remember the person you're presenting to didn't necessarily comb through hundreds of documents like you did or hundreds of verbatim. So important to give them that context.
Yeah. Yeah. All right, so this goes to that editor bit. We can see before and after with chocolate with vanilla excluded, what happens to the total matches. So this removes about 5,000. So it looks like in this data, when they mentioned chocolate, they were also mentioning vanilla. So we got to be really careful when we're doing that exclusion. In volume, you can select whether you want the concept to be defined as exact versus total matches. And that's where you may want to build out your exact match list and default to that. Whereas in other features, maybe you want the total matches. All right, ready to move on to concept lists? Perhaps. So if you haven't used Daylight in a while, one of the things that you'll see is this has been reconfigured to make it hopefully a little bit more intuitive. We allow users to save multiple concept lists, and you want to make sure that you're saving your concept lists as you go if you like the changes you're making. The concept list will go into italics with an asterisk if it has not been saved. Sometimes a good time to save it. You can also rename the concept list by clicking this pencil icon. So if you are doing a work in progress or you see someone else's list that you're kind of branching off of, adding your initials to the end of it and then clicking save can be really helpful. That way you have, Kim's analysis versus John's analysis, and you guys can both edit freely since you are working in the same project. If you like a list and you're starting somewhere new, previously you would edit and then add and save. We've made it easier by just clicking add new list. It lets you start from scratch. Make sure you saved your old list before clicking this, or else it will revert to the previously saved version. When you click new list, you can now quickly import when you click add from visualization. So if you're doing a unique to filter, and let's say you're doing unique to my brand strengths, adding those into the list, change it all blue. Unique to my competitors' detractors, add to list, change all those to green. You can do a SWOT analysis much more quickly there using the unique to filter and then the bulk add from visualization using the colors as you go. I like to add the prefixes, my strengths, my threats, other opportunities, other weaknesses. That can be helpful and fun. Just make sure you're naming your concept list appropriately so that you can reference it and anyone else checking that project can know what you were working on. Anything else?
Yeah, I think it's a great point. I think it kind of goes with the same kind of style that you were doing in your concept lists. It's always kind of contextualizing it for other people. And if you're ever going to make a mistake, there is a quick undo button that does pop up in the middle of the screen whenever you do make any changes. So if you feel like you freaked out and you did something wrong, always look to the top. There should be a quick and easy undo for you.
Yeah, it's at the top in the center, so you'll have to route your eyes there, and it disappears in a few seconds. So you have a little bit to check it. It's not a undo sequentially, kind of like what you would see in Excel. So be quick. All right. So after this, we have my screen freeze. Okay, so we're going to go into the features now for the configure visualization side panel. We have the pharmaceutical reviews as our example here, where the concepts are split between DX or the diagnosis and the RX or the prescription. These are all very specific terms for these pharmaceuticals that were prescribed. Because the AI is learning from the data, it's surfacing these things as unique. Effexor is not something that's mentioned in regular conversation, usually, Concerta, etc. And we can view it across categories. So one of the things that I want to make sure that people are aware of, once we've made our concept lists, if we scroll down the configure visualization tab, that's where we see include or exclude conceptual matches in volume. And visualize across concept volume is something that's regularly asked for until they see that we have it. In this example, we're viewing it by category, which is the prescription. So on the far left, we have Adderall. On the far right, we have Vyvanse. And we can see across the line what was mentioned for each drug. Cymbalta was mentioned explicitly in the Cymbalta reviews. Anxiety was prescribed, I think, I'd have to double check which column that is. And then we have like Ritalin and Vyvanse. So we can see across the columns what was mentioned where. We can see the ADHD or focus medications, those things being mentioned or ADHD mentioned in those drugs that were prescribed versus the antidepressants were mentioned with the appropriate drugs for that diagnosis.
Yeah, so volume really, again, focused on the quantitative, a little bit like a pivot table creator. Configure visualization allows you to kind of run through a couple questions. What concepts would you like to visualize? How would you like to count those documents? How would you like to visualize them? So easy way to kind of configure the chart or the presentation that you want to put out. So if you ever do get lost, the sidebar helps you kind of organize those thoughts. But again, another way to visualize across those really important metadata fields that you have.
Yeah, and one thing I'd like to point out is when a very tightly or close competitor is mentioned, it'll identify it as a conceptual match. So in the Adderall column, this is dark blue, it's faded, but if you want to see the data set, let us know. It is a light blue mention in the Ritalin dataset and vice versa. So across the Ritalin concept mention, Ritalin is mentioned explicitly for Ritalin reviews, but the conceptual match Adderall is mentioned in the Adderall reviews. But we don't see that for the antidepressants because they're not competitors in that dataset. All right. So next we have Galaxy. I tend to describe this as the two-dimensional window into the 300-dimension vector space underneath the hood. And this is where we can see all of the clusters. We recently added configure visualization to this tool as a response to folks, communicating the default was too many. Let's scale back. Let's take it more high level, or I need more control. Like I don't want to surface the word beer in my beer reviews, or I don't want to surface my brand name in my brand reviews. You now have more control over that. So you can choose whether you want to sort by prevalence. The default is 250. You can scale it back to 10, 50, or scale it out to 500. And yeah, I've really appreciated being able to use active concepts in this view. So if I wanted to take the 250 that I needed, bulk add to my concept list, and then curate it from there, that's made some really nice visualizations. I've also liked using unique to filter. We used that in our recent integrated CX webinar, unique to time period. So what was unique to the first 3 months of launch versus the last 3 years of development. It tells a really clear story while stripping out the noise of, yeah, that's what the game was about. Yeah, this is a game. These are the elements of the game. We wanted to see what were people noticing that wasn't just the normal mentions. So unique to filter has been really nice. And we can also control the color concepts. So in this case, I wanted we have fruity, rich, and terrible dictating these colors. But if it wanted to be more tactical of flavor versus appearance versus overall recommend, a different concept list can tell a different narrative with the color scheme. Anything else to?
Yeah, so I mean, I think Kim hit all the points. I think Galaxy, like she was saying, it's really good for your welcoming slides. Really good telling you high level story. Fun to walk stakeholders through. It's interesting, you being able to color and do things like that. So kind of really good in those opening slides and for that purpose.
Yeah, and if you're unfamiliar with a specific data set, this can surface things like if you didn't know that the language around smell and flavor being two different components, they use similar language. If you didn't know that, this surfaces that because it puts those terms together geographically. Right. Then we have drivers. So when we shift over to the business users, this is that if they mentioned concept X, the average numerical was whatever it is. In this case, we've recently allowed folks to cross-check. So if something is closely associated with high aroma score or low aroma score, we can surface those concepts and cross-check it with rating. That is much tougher for most audiences. The most appropriate use case is to have these synced, but you have more options if you need a differently cut analysis. And we have the active concept list, so you can control what colors the concepts are. Fatigue versus mood swings being less severe sentimentally than brain zaps or nightmares, whereas able to concentrate, lifesaver, and manageable in a drug context, positive drivers, universally positive sentiment, all good things.
Yeah, so drivers, really good for exploring score data. Also can be used for other numerical data. We've seen a lot of clients explore the use of binary scoring scales, so 0 1s for before and afters, for current state and expected state, things like that. Time to resolve for sport tickets. Really anything you feel has a strong enough correlation to your text and your data. Driver is a good way to either have it suggest concepts to you, or if you're, if the scale you're using is viable, you can, dig deeply into those scores as well.
Yeah, I've seen interesting use cases. I saw someone use family size. So what is closely associated, or what things were mentioned with single family homes versus, 5 folks in the family or more. More kids in the house going to result in different things on the respondents' awareness list than if it's just one person. And that was an interesting analysis in drivers as well. All right. So then we have sentiment. So sentiment is a great way to, or this is the drivers table, concepts table. So this is if they mentioned a terrible flavor from the flavor group, on average, what was their score? So if the scatter plot is too much or doesn't share this story as concisely as you need to, this is another option to show that data as well. But from there, I like to go to sentiment. So if you need an exemplary quote for something, like I know that side effects is bad, or I need to find a positive mention of side effects, going to the sentiment tool allows you to quickly dive into a concept and pull out that quote, because sometimes it's hard to tell a story without surfacing what the respondents were saying themselves. If you value text data, if the company values text data and the stakeholders value that story, this can go a long way in expediting that surfacing. We did a webinar series in November on different ways to take this raw concept data and pull out insights like comparing polarization versus net sentiment. I highly recommend watching that if you haven't seen it already. That's something we can grab here. It learns from the data, like I said earlier, so it knows that side effects are generally bad, and it surfaces the verbatims that it's most confident in. So I experienced horrible side effects for months. What a nightmare. The AI detects that that is a bad thing, whereas the side effect only lasted 3 days. In the context of it has been wonderful, my mood has improved greatly, positive. And a neutral statement of fact, I'm an adult caretaker and I want to know the side effects of stopping Vyvanse. There's not necessarily a statement there as much as it's, or there's not a sentiment as much as it is statement of fact. Notes on concept level sentiment.
So important thing to know here is really the approach that we take as well. A lot of people out there are doing document level sentiment, something we did do in the past, and found it to be inaccurate. So switching over to a concept level sentiment approach allows you to really get at the sentence level, at the concept level, improving accuracy by a lot, and just giving you the ability to really get into the details. Sometimes looking at documents or verbatims as a whole can get either overwhelming or be just too much information in presentation. So if you ever do need to get into details, like Kim said, really the statements, the stories, and those quick details, sentiment's a really good tool for that.
Yeah, and I'll expand on the document level thing. And I think it's easy to prescribe it as inaccurate, but I think it's mostly incomplete, right? Because the nature of communicated language is nuanced. I liked this, but I didn't like this, or I liked this except for this. And washing it out in a document level doesn't align well with the truth of the story when you're getting storyful responses, when people are explaining their before, their current, and their plans for the future, right? It was bad, it got better, and now I'm looking forward to all these things that could be in the future. We want to capture all of that and be respectful to things that were good the whole time versus things that needed a redemption arc. So that is sentiment. So then the functionality that doesn't have a feature is unique to filter. This can be really helpful, but you have to have metadata. With Daylight, you can upload as much metadata as you would like for a given verbatim. For my fantastic analyst sanity's sake, I don't recommend uploading more than a few dozen metadata fields for filtering. I've seen some clients want to like hoard and include everything, like hundreds of metadata fields. Don't do that to yourselves. It's not necessarily going to be helpful. You want to be strategic about what is going to help me in understanding my data. In this case, the alcohol by volume, various scores, the style, that's all very helpful. But getting the like IP address for a beer review is not going to be aligned, and it's not going to be surfacing something super helpful. For the WebMD pharmaceutical reviews, these are all interesting cuts, right? Age, what they were diagnosed with, how they rate the drug, whether they are the patient or the patient's caregiver, what they were prescribed with, and gender. Those are all things that can be interesting to filter on. And that allows you to do unique to filter. So, all right. So next slide is when we filter documents. So this is from that integrated CX webinar. On the left is what was unique to launch, performance issues, 60 frames per second, frame rate. The AI identified these things were related to each other. We can see references to and I'm not a gamer, like the different computing pieces. So the 980 Ti versus the 16 gigabyte RAM, the AI has identified that these are related and it puts them together. On the other side, we have the relationship, the refund language. It's getting that $60 is related to tech refund, which is related to the tech demo as a result of having the product mismarketed at the time of launch and people pre-purchasing the game with heightened expectations. When we flip it over to what the reviews were saying unique to 2018 and onward, 2-3 years after launch, the language drastically changes. Base building, underwater, quests, these are things that weren't available and weren't mentioned at launch, and it gives us a really nice story about what gamers value, and a YouTube video that was created and I think routed some folks back to the game. So
yeah, so really good kind of way of showing how the tools is pulling out context. Being gamer myself, I mean, your video card getting lined up with your memory and all the names for the processors and things like that, getting all grouped nicely together is really nice to have. And then having the tool's ability to also learn as time progresses. You can see on the right-hand side VR capabilities being introduced, new functionality, things like that. So really just showcasing the tool's ability to take any data set and run with it with really little to no training.
yeah, and compiling the data over time was really helpful. I see a lot of analysts want to kind of section off, but using this approach of putting it together and then branching afterwards allows us to see what was unique to one period versus another. There was a market research client that we worked with that did a pandemic study, and every month they asked their panelists different questions that they then put together and then partitioned off after. So one month was describe your shopping experience. In April of 2020 or March of 2020, people are talking about like the toilet paper shortage, etc. Then a different month, they would ask about work from home experience or grocery shopping experience or mental health. And by putting it all together with the larger theme of how is the pandemic affecting people, they then branched out to see like where is anxiety showing up depending on the month? Where are mentions of childcare showing up on mentions of the month? And that was a really good, interesting project that kind of took an innovative approach because the questions were so different from each other, but they had the idea of the grounding theme and what they wanted from it. So that was really smart. All right, after this we have branching. So if you need to branch a project because either based on time, on topic, on a specific filter value, you want to go to the Documents tab. So this right here. And this is where you can see the exact responses, the exact verbatims that are, in the data. You want to make sure that you are viewing the correct subset. If you have a concept selected, it will branch on the concept. So if chocolate is selected, you get to choose whether you want the total matches, where vanilla and toffee and cocoa will be included in that branch, or exact matches, and then you want to name your project. In the project description, I recommend users include the details like, when is it due? What is the objective? What am I trying to prove? Do I have a hypothesis? That's really helpful. And then if you're in a cloud workspace where I can chime in, you can shoot me a link and be like, hey, this is due Friday. Can you check my work? I'm happy to. And you get to decide which workspace it goes to.
Yeah, it's a really good way to expand on topics, on filters, on metadata pieces. Remember, when you do branch a project, you are essentially creating an entirely new language model as well. So in theory, your results should be a lot cleaner, a lot focused on what you branched it off from. So a really interesting way to deep dive into things that you maybe aren't getting the full sense of, or things that you are tasked to report more clearly on.
Yeah, I think that's good. All right, and then within that same tab, something that we've again changed fairly recently is how much control you have over the metadata available that you can see for a given verbatim. So in this example, we have the review text, and we can select that we want to see the RX or the prescription associated with that review, the rating, the condition, and we can see who was saying what about what, depending on the metadata you have available. You can also select what data you have available in the viewer. So when you select a given verbatim, you can choose what's available on that right-hand side there. If you are doing an HR or an employee survey use case, perhaps you have access to the reviewer or the employee's manager, but you don't want to surface that necessarily. You want to keep it more anonymous, but you want to include more metadata than that. This is a great way to kind of take that screenshot. It surfaces the concepts that are exact matches and conceptual matches if you have a concept selected. So for no side effects, the conceptual match for that is, I haven't had an anxiety attack. It's a long collocation, but it's a good conceptual match for no side effects.
Yeah, so just being able to customize the document viewer a little bit to your standards, whether you're doing a quick browse through just the side panel or opening it up for the full view, just choosing the things that are going to be important to your reading, making it a little bit faster for you to scan through documents, or like Kim said, when you're doing any sort of screenshots, really helpful for you to be able to hide certain things that either you don't want to show in the presentation, or just don't want other people seeing.
Yep. And on the left, the concepts are sorted in order of relevancy to the selected concept. So for no side effects, the first one in the list either mentioned the exact term the most, or a bunch of the conceptual matches. And occasionally you'll see a document surfaced that is more relevant to the concept, even if it doesn't mention the concept explicitly. And that's because they're using so many references to the conceptual matches that the AI is like, you should probably look at this one. So if you're looking at like inclusivity, for example, and a lot of people are mentioning inclusivity, but someone else is talking about specific marginalized groups and ways that those can be included better, that might float up to the top because they're talking about the topic, and the AI is able to detect that. We're almost to the end, you guys, then we'll have time for questions. I know this is a long one, so I will have NLU hours in the future to focus more on the different functionalities and features, but collaboration, super important. If you're working in teams, which most of you are, you want to be able to share views. I like to share views to align with my slides. So if I have a shared view for slide 4, 5, 6, I'll name a shared view for that so I can go back to it and see what were the specific settings that I used in case I needed to add a concept or reference it or deep dive into something. There's a share button at the top. It shows us how many of the documents are being viewed. So if you have a filter applied, that's going to go down. It's going to show you how many documents are in there, what feature, how it's sorted, etc. So please use that. And if you don't have a concept list saved, it will remind you to share that concept list or to save it to make sure that it's reflective. All right.
Really good for also constant use cases, data that is continuously getting stacked. If you need to come back to something like the same filter over and over, really good for those types of use cases as well.
Definitely. Or if you have any challenges and you say, hey, CSM, did I do this right? I've seen that used as a shared view as well. So a good way to ask for help or collaborate in that way too. So finally, another great way to collaborate is to set things up in a Power BI Tableau dashboard, routing the information out to other stakeholders. After you've done the analysis, we have API documentation for folks that want to set up those hooks. We also have a solutions engineer who's happy to help anyone and everyone to get those set up. We have that as an option as well.
Yeah, so the API really allows you to kind of take control of the system. Everything that you're doing in the UI right now is hitting an API endpoint. So they're almost directly correlated one-to-one with a little bit more as well. So anything that you need to fully customize, anything that you need to automate, the API is really good for that. And we've probably built some things, some starter scripts that have multi kind of customer functionality. So if you're ever thinking that there might be something that you need to automate, don't hesitate to reach out to us or our solutions architect. We're more than happy to help you work through it at any level of expertise. I know Wood's helped us with a lot of customers.
True. And if there's anything missing here of I wish you guys could do X, let John and I know. Put it in that client feedback survey, shoot us an email. We are happy to pass that along and work with you if you need more endpoints, more solutions. We don't want you waiting for functionality. We want you to have the functionality that you need to make the biggest splash you can in your organizations. So
I think to go off that point as well, we're also not naturally trained as analysts. So you guys may come up with different techniques, different ways to use daylight. So don't be afraid to kind of take risks and do different things than we do, and feel free to also send that feedback to us. All those things are going to be great for product improvement. They're going to be great for other customers, and we're always happy to share things, obviously, with kind of tight anonymity included as well.
And then, so that covers the what's in my data, the so what, how to deep dive, how to collaborate. We do have some questions, and we are about at the top of the hour. Should we be seeing column headers, or is it only available by hovering? It's currently only available by hovering, although you can export it in volume. So if you need to see it in Excel, it's available there. But the column headers are not available because you have so many options for how many metadata fields can exist there. So in the beer example, there's dozens and dozens of beer types, which have long words but skinny columns, and that posed a challenge that we hadn't been able to address yet in the UI. But in the standard analysis slides, I tend to put the headers in the slide there from the screenshot, but good question from the audience.
Yeah.
And I'll go to the next slide. Other questions, because this is the time. Otherwise, we had a good review.
Any other questions? Anything you'd like us to recover? Do a deep dive in? Feel free to either send it to us now, or feel free to also send it to us, obviously, through email, through the Sports Center, directly to us. We're always here to help support.
Yes, and we will be posting this on YouTube. So if you need to share this with other members of your team, if you need to watch it again at half speed, at double speed, pause, rewind, we want to make sure this is available. We'll also be releasing more specific shorts. If you need more detailed, more concise, fewer ums and ahs from me explaining something, we'll have those available as well. So those will be.
And hopefully this gave you kind of a general overview. We are also doing a more detailed dive into the features, their functions, different things like that. So I think stay tuned. I think Kim's been doing a really good job at keeping us organized and staying on track. So look out for those coming soon.
Yeah, next month will be the science overview. So unique to filter, Galaxy, working on setting the axes in Galaxy, using colors, how to interpret that. I'll be focusing on that science stuff. Ignore functionality, that's something that we didn't cover today. That scientific nuke Death Star function of, severing all associations, I'll be covering that. And then March, John will be covering more detail on sentiment and drivers pairing. All right. Cool. Well, I look forward to seeing you guys next month at the science webinar. If you can make it, feel free to register in advance. We send those out in the monthly CSM emails. It's also available in my email signature if you're one of my clients, and John may be including that in the future as well. So, all right, we'll let you guys go. Have a good rest of your week, and we look forward to seeing you all soon.
Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.
Bye.